Okay, well, thank you all for choosing to spend a little time with me on this beautiful Sunday. The topic before us is astrology and politics. Uh, I didn't get any questions this month. Nobody asked anything, so I'm going to go straight into the material that I've been working on here. And if there's time at the end, we'll take some questions. You know, when you look at the whole field of astrology, people tend to be in two camps, whether they know it or not. They either see astrology as an active discipline or they see it as a passive discipline. You who do astrology know that you have clients that come to you and ask, what's going to happen? And you have clients that come to you and says, what can I do? One being passive, the other being active. You know, at the very beginning of astrology, I was in college and I was doing some divination. And the divination showed clearly that I was not going to graduate uh, at the end of the semester. So I immediately went into the registrar's office and I says, is there any problem? Is there any reason I wouldn't graduate? Well, if you can remember back to your college days, you remember you took, oh, what, 15 credit hours a semester? Well, it turned out when I transferred into this uh, rather expensive private college, university, two of my classes did not transfer. So I was actually 6 credit hours short from graduating. So what happened? I decided it was essential that I had graduated. I had to pay for two more classes. I ended up taking 21 credit hours in my last semester of college. It was horrendous. Uh, it was, in, I mean, I was, living very marginally at the time. I was fine, but I didn't have the extra money. So I had to take out a student loan and I worked round the clock, making sure that I could get my classwork done. And they were all high level classes and it was excruciating. But I did graduate. And my point is to say, before we start into this topic of astrology and politics, it's important to remember that what you do makes a difference, even in the collective, not just in your personal life, but you have an effect on all of society. So it's important that we approach this topic looking at it not as, just something passive. It's like, oh, who's going to win the election? Is there going to be peace in the Middle East? Is there, or Pakistan and India going to fight another war? All of which is a legitimate mindset. But I'm saying that there is a more important mindset that you can adopt, which is that actually what you do makes a difference. If you change something in you, you will change your world. And we all have to live in this world together. So, what does politics mean? Politics, basically, in the broadest sense, is I mean, Aristotle wrote a book called Politics, but and we sort of use the term in that way today, which is it's the structure, it's how we set up the rules or how the rules are set up that govern how we can all live together in one community and one country on one planet. And and we live in a world where there are many different systems. We have dictatorships, we have monarchies, we have democracies. You know, People think of democracy as being as such good currency. Very few people want to claim that they're undemocratic, that they are against the idea of the people actually deciding that a government should be built on the will of the people that govern. Uh, so it's because it's common currency, we have a lot of what you call fake democracies in the world, like Russia or in any number of other countries where they hold elections, but it's really all decided by a small group of insiders or one dictator. Um, so, what does astrology have to bring to the table? How can we uh, how can we um, actually get um, in some mileage out of the system that we all look at? You know, most astrologers, most of the time, don't talk about politics. And if they do it more from an ivory tower standpoint, meaning that they don't want to talk to individual clients about it. And we look at the track record, how come so many good astrologers predicted that Hillary Clinton was going to win the presidency in the United States in 2016? And how many good astrologers predicted that Donald Trump would win in the year 2020? Well, astrologers are human beings, and astrologers make mistakes just like any human being. But astrology should be a secret key, an objective lens that gives us a leg up, a way of looking in to something so that we're not blindsided by events. Now, what makes astrology more complicated in the political arena is that we live under a number of different umbrellas as a process of that CEO Carter, an English astrologer from the last century, referred to as subsumption, meaning that the chart of the country and the chart of the city have something to say about what happens to individuals in that country. Obviously, your individual chart is about you, but if you're in the United States in 1940 and the country is getting ready to go to war, what's going on in the collective is going to have an impact on what happens in your day-to-day life. Now, just to step back and get the big picture, uh, the Earth revolves around the sun, and our solar system revolves around the galaxy. And the solar system's revolution around the galaxy gives us a pattern called the four Yugas, or large epochs of millions of years. And certain things are happening in each one of those periods. And then we have, as Melinda McCulloch asked a number of months back about the age of Aquarius, and I talked about the precession of the equinox, a 26,000 year cycle, and what that means, and how that has something to do with what goes on. And as we explore a little deeper into this, I'll talk to you about uh, some great cycles that go on that shape the political destiny. Now, just to back up on the 2016 um, uh, predictions, everybody was, ESAR had a conference and they had like 10 experts on a panel that were all, talking about the upcoming election. All of them predicted that Hillary Clinton would win. I know everybody that was on the panel, and there wasn't a bad astrologer amongst them. But it was clear as the nose on your face if you could just look at the astrology. Not It had nothing to do with whether you liked it or not. Donald Trump's was a Donald Trump's chart was a wrecking ball. It was going through everything, and he was going to clearly end up in the White House. Uh, Now, in the predictions on the 2020 elections, I know some very fine astrologers that sent me these long blogs predicting that Donald Trump was going to win. And even though they are very fine astrologer, they were, if you can believe it, were quoting to me talking points from Fox News. It was like, what? If you looked at the astrology of it, it was very clear, regardless of who was running against Donald Trump, that he wasn't going to win because the whole course of the direction of civilization over the next 10 years was something that his chart clearly wasn't going to cross into. So, again, this is not about what a great astrologer I am. I make mistakes like everybody else and have made tons of them in the political arena. But it's important to point out, first of all, what happened, what the astrology was about, and then to do the retrospective, to go back and look, why do good astrologers make mistakes like this? Well, it really boils down to three things. Um, One is self-interest. Uh, People have a stake in something that they're going to do better financially or emotionally or psychologically if somebody wins. The other is prejudice. They can't conceive of somebody, winning or that they don't like. And the third is imagination, whether it be fear or wishful thinking, uh, some, the fantasy land departure, which astrologers are human beings and are can go into that arena very easily, just like any other human being. The reason that a lot of astrologers don't talk about politics, I mean, meat and potatoes astrologers like me that see clients and that's what we do for our job. Uh, we avoid political discussions because politics, like religion, tends to be very divisive. Now, why can an astrologer end up in a religious conversation with a Hindu or a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim and not have it be contentious? It's because at some level we've flattened out our mentality. We are tolerant. Not just me, but most astrologers today. You have come to accept we live in a pluralistic society. We live in a pluralistic world. But that hasn't happened politically. We still live with this great divide. And so, what is the basis for these gnawing prejudices that people have? Well, I talked ad nauseum about the difficulty with the north node of the moon in Gemini, getting at truthful data. So here's what I believe. Number one, astrology is a path of knowledge. It is a path of knowledge to God, and along the way, it should make us be finer people. Knowledge can enrich us. It's kind of interesting to me that the country in Central America that has the lowest level of poverty, that doesn't have a standing army, has the highest quality of life for the citizens, is Costa Rica. Well, they also have a 97% literacy rate. So you have an educated population. And when you have an educated population, democracy works much better. Um, so here's what I believe. Number one, astrology is a path of knowledge. You can have an intelligent conversation with people who oppose you, politically if you can agree on facts, if you can come to terms with what is um, the data involved. Now, they may have different data that they want to emphasize than yours, but you can still have uh, common ground if you're not in dispute of the facts outright. Like, Marjorie Taylor Greene saying that the forest fires in California are started by the Jews sending laser beams from outer space. Well, you know what? There's not much room for conversation. It's like somehow the person's living in a reality that's certainly different than mine. Or when people say, as Donald Trump says, the big lie, that the election in 2020 was stolen with absolutely zero data. Well, how do you have a rational conversation? It's not really possible. So we end up in a society where there's a buildup of toxicity, of people who stand outside the divide. And now the thing here is um, there are people in the country, like a lot of the followers of QAnon right now, that want to have a dictatorship, that they believe that that is a better form of government. They bought into the cult of personality, um, in this case, Donald Trump. Well, you know what? I disagree with it, but I can respect it because at least it's honest and just comes straight forward. Oh, yeah, this is what we should do. It's difficult when you deal with people who worm their way around it and won't take a clear stand on anything out of fear or prejudice or whatever is brewing inside them, self interest. Anyway, first thing is, as I say, astrology is a path of knowledge, and astrology is always right. But no particular astrologer that I know of is always right. Astrologers are often wrong because they're human beings. They, as I stumble to try to read what goes on. The third thing that I believe is that astrology is objective, but astrologers are only objective partially and some of the time. Uh, by definition, astrologers are subjects. So we have this objective lens, but we are subjective by definition. So my conscious prejudices out of all of this is that you can have discussions if you can agree on factual data. I have another prejudice that is that kindness and tolerance are the first step to finding common ground. Third thing that is as a prejudice of mine is that the moral rules of conduct are mechanisms for our personal lives, but they're also for our professional and public lives. Now, most people will pay lip service to that. So they will say, oh, well, you know, our public servants should be moral people, live by some moral code. Well, okay, Bill Clinton has some kind of sexual liaison with a person and lies about it to Congress. Well, that's not morally correct. You have somebody like Mike Pence that says, he wouldn't have dinner with a single woman if his wife wasn't there. Well, okay, he has a moral principle. So at least we see that there, people pay lip service to this moral concept. Most everybody does in political life, but not everybody or most politicians don't live up to it most of the time. Why this is important is that I also believe a good political leader must be able to set aside their self-interest in regards to how they function in their public life. Uh, you know, um, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, a number of people in public life have believed that the moral principles laid down by Jesus or some incarnation of the Avatar uh, was the guiding light for how one should live, not just in your personal life, but in your public life. So, anyway, we all have values, and our values color what we look at in terms of what we think would be a good way for people to be governed. Um, I want to talk for a minute about how we overcome our prejudices, which we all have, and how we get back to uh, allowing our values to transform based on empirical data. And I talked about this in many lectures through the last 5 years or so. I gave a talk called The Five Gifts of Astrology, which is about the mental changes that comes about in a person's life through the study of astrology. Five gifts are tolerance, timing, comprehensiveness, self-understanding, and the spiritual path. And you can explore that if you wish. I had given that talk at an online conference sponsored by my friend Aswin in India. So, what do we have um, in terms of ability to look at and decipher what goes on in the world politically? Well, all societies have rules around how people earn a living, how commerce is carried on, and uh, laws, rules around procreation, who's an appropriate sex partner. Every society has that. And again, this is another long talk that I've given a number of times. But the point is, uh, we set up these rules based either on in everybody getting together and deciding, or a small group of people, like a dictatorship, monarchy, um, a military junta, or a democracy. Most of the people in the world do not live in a democracy today. Um, and the whole concept of democracy hangs by a thread. And the divine has a plan. So we'll see how this unfolds. Uh, it is interesting. Uh, we live in a democracy, and our economic system is capitalism. Well, capitalism is ruled by Jupiter. Communist countries uh, have central planning, means the government decides what is important, and that's where the resources go. The marketplace is not the consideration. So Saturn rules the central planning. And if you look at the whole spectrum of the planets that we address politically, we have uh, um, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, the three trans Saturnian planets, as you know, bringing something into our society that wasn't there prior to their discovery as a conscious property. Then you have Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter optimistic, Saturn pessimistic. And you have these um, planets like an accordion, opening and closing. They are in a 20-year cycle. And, for everybody, everywhere in the whole world, every culture, Jupiter and Saturn go from a conjunction to opposition, back to conjunction. That 20-year cycle is a very demonstratable in every society. I can just talk about it briefly in the United States because it's the country that I live in and know best on this. But, the year from 2010 was a time of expanse. Uh, from 2010 to 2020 was a contraction. Then from 2020, 2030 we're in a period of expansion again. Um, you look back at the last century, 1900 to, was the Jupiter Saturn conjunction. Then 10 years of expansion, 10 years of contraction. 1920, the roaring 20s, to 1930, the contraction, to back to 1940, 1940 to 1950, expansion, 50 to 60, contraction, 60, to 70, expansion, 70 to 80, contraction, 1980 to 1990, expansion, contraction from 90 to 2000, 2000, 2010, expansion, and so on. So we have this warp and woof between the two. Uh, it's interesting to note. Uh, do you know that Jupiter rules the Republican Party and Saturn rules the Democratic Party? Why is that? Well, the Republican Party is based on the idea of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. It's this optimism. And when you talk to people who are, old line real Republicans, um, they have a genuine belief that it is good to encourage people to um, promote themselves, to do what is in their self-interest, and that there's a guiding light that makes it all worthwhile. And there's a strong argument to be made for letting people make it on their own. And the Democratic Party is ruled by Saturn, which is the idea that we have to have a safety net. We have to have some boundaries that prohibit people from falling through the cracks, from being disenfranchised. And these two powerful planetary deities operate at every level of creation. And it's important that we have both. Uh, it's interesting if you study the chart, which I'm not going to go into today, but the chart of the Republican Party and the chart of the Democratic Party, which both goes back to the 1800s. It demonstrates the clear changes that come about in their political philosophies. The Republican Party, in the party of Lincoln, was a party of having a strong central government. And, the party changed. And the Democratic Party, of course, has gone, all over the map, but has tried to plant its foot, today in the side of working for the people at the bottom of society, the people who actually work for a living. Um, I want to point out that there was a conjunction of Uranus and Pluto in 1966, which basically changed everything in the world that we live in. So going back to the time of the discovery, remember the planet of freedom is Uranus, discovered just after the American Revolution in 1776, and just before the French Revolution in 1778. Uh, the this is the idea of individual liberty, the idea that everybody should be free to do whatever they want, basically. I mean, in its pure, unadulterated form. And then what happened with the discovery of Neptune in 1848? We had the idea of everybody should be equal economically. There was the time of the Communist Manifesto, and riots throughout Europe of the working class saying it, um, the people who work should own the means of production. Again, Neptune, its highest state, of course, is infinite bliss, but its lower state is, delusional. And then we had the discovery of Pluto in 1930, which ushered in, fascism, the dictatorship, the Nazi Party. Oh, it's interesting, kind of a sidelight. I wonder if I have that map here. If you look at the chart for the forming of the Nazi Party, which was, if anybody wants to look it up, it's February 24th, 1920, at 7:29 p.m. in Munich, Germany. Well, that was long before Hitler took over the party. But, um, you know, sorry for the music, it's my next door neighbor. Um, uh, the, um, the chart for the founding of the party had Jupiter and Neptune conjunct uh, uh, in Leo, and it was in the 11th house. So it's the idea that this, we can all get high together, we can all do this thing, and it was a belief in a Leonian ideology. Now, interestingly enough, it was formed with the sun in the sign Pisces, which is beyond ideal, and is conjunct the planet Uranus, the planet of this higher, freedom for everybody. But it obviously miscarried. It was exactly trine the planet Pluto in the 10th house, which, Pluto was discovered 10 years later, which is the idea of dictatorship, but not dictatorship of the proletariat, the working class. It only pretended to be that. It was actually the dictatorship of the Nazi Party, but of one person. It was a cult of personality. And uh, and of course, the history. It had a 25-year history, and it basically went out of existence, sort of, with the death of Hitler in 1945. But it's instructive of um, how good ideals can go wrong, can go awry. And that's why I started with the idea of it's our personal initiative actually does make a difference. And we build a better world by starting with what each of us individually can do to make the world better. Now, we didn't make Jupiter and Pluto conjunct in 1965, 66, and they stayed in that arena for the next 3 or 4 years. Um, the, but it shook things up. It changed everything. We had the advent of the microchip, and we had the Vietnam War and protests and the civil rights movement. But we had student uh, movements all across the world. We had the Cultural Revolution in China. It was tremendous shaking up of everything. And life never went back. It just kept going forward from that point on. Now, there's one other cycle that I wanted to mention that was, I think, really important for everyone, which was the conjunction of Uranus and Neptune, which happened from February 2nd to October 24th in 1993. The three conjunctions between those two planets ushered in a new economic cycle. I, of course, was a practicing astrologer at the time. I sent a physical letter out to everybody that was, on my mailing list at the time, saying the whole economic structure of the world is going to change in the next year, and you will see that we will see it in embryonic form in 1993. I described it, but I didn't know what it was. How we would do commerce, at remote levels. We would do it, using computers and stuff. And that was the birth of the internet. I could see the pieces, but I didn't understand the general structure. And again, of course, we have one world economic structure, regardless of all the different currencies and all the political structures. You can do business anywhere, anytime. Trillions of dollars are moved from one country to another online every single day. But we don't have one world political structure. Um, so, in one sense, we have this brewing underneath of the way money is made and distributed, but we don't have one legal system uh, putting all the pieces together, which is it's very important. And it won't be until we do that we start seeing harmony in the world. We'll start seeing that in about 2024, 2025. Um, Now, the other big hoop-de-doo for everyone uh, is that Pluto has been in Capricorn, which is the sign of management. It rules the laws, how the system is set up, and how we have limitations on other people's behavior. And in other words, your freedom is limited by what we collectively agree on would be harmful to everybody else. In other words, you can do your own thing as long as it doesn't harm anybody else, is the idea. Um, but the planning, how that central planning structure, is it by a group of elites that just let us do it, we know better? Well, in democracy, it's messy because if you have an idea, you have to convince the majority of the people that your idea is in everybody's best interest in order to have a chance of getting it implemented. Well, I want to talk about the US chart for a moment. I could put up these charts, but I'm going to go it alone without them for a time. If we have a question and answer and you want to see any of these charts, I'll be happy to put them up. And if you communicate with me by email and you want the data on any of this, I'll be happy to share it. So, America serves us an important place. I believe that America, well, my masters told me America will be the center of spirituality for the world in the future. But for the moment, here in the political arena, America is like the last best hope. As Ronald Reagan called it, uh, the city shining on the side of the mountain. It's like we uh, can do something that other countries can't do. We do it messy, we do it with a lot of fits and starts, but holding on to that is very important. Now, when the United States was formed, we were formed in the middle of a revolution. Well, guess what? Uranus was in Gemini. It was in the chart that I use, as you all know, 2:14 a.m. on July 4th, 1774. Well, Uranus was rising in that chart. But anybody who has any chart that they use for the US always has Uranus in Gemini. Well, 84 years later, Uranus was in Gemini again. Well, that was in 1860, time of the Civil War. Well, 84 years later, Uranus was in Gemini in 1941 when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and the United States was at war again. Well, you can take it or leave it, but in 1925 and 2025, 2026, Uranus will be back in Gemini. Well, does war have to be uh, with guns? Do we have to argue? Do we have to hate each other? It's like, well, some people can't hold a rational conversation. They beat up their husbands or they beat up their wives. They only have disagreements like, you know, I'm picking on Marjorie Taylor Greene today. She stalking Alexandria Ocasio Cortez around the halls of Congress, shouting at her. It's like, well, where do these people come from? Generally, historically, uh, radical groups, like terrorists, emerge in a society when they don't believe that they can convince the majority of the people of their ideas. So they have to fight. They have to, hurt them. If you really believe that your ideas are better and you believe in the potency, that you're actually literally standing on truth, you don't need to back into this hatred, to this violence. Um, so, the question was asked in a Q&A session a number of months back, when will we see a civil war in the United States again? Well, we are in a civil war right now. And what I'm saying is that it doesn't have to be a shooting war. It doesn't have to be, even though we've got more guns than we have people in the United States now. We don't need to be violent with each other. We can grow as human beings to have a rational discourse and to come to conclusions that benefit everybody. Now, the key here is that obviously most people don't want to have what's good for everybody. They can't put aside their self-interest and see that it isn't so much that the pie can only be cut up so many different directions, but that we can work together and keep making the pie bigger. And I'm not talking about more material abundance. We could solve all of the economic problems on the planet in a day if we eliminated greed. Individual and collective greed is responsible for all of the world hunger, all of the what we consider economic problems. So Uranus is mental, Neptune is emotion, and Pluto is physical, it's behavior. And the Pluto discovery with the rise of fascism is very violent. So Pluto is all or nothing. Going through Capricorn, it is stirring the pot, breaking up, all central organizing structures. And Pluto will leave uh, uh, Capricorn in 2024. Um, so it's been there since 2008. And It's been a relatively quick passage through Capricorn. You know, spent like 40 years in Cancer, and as Pluto's orbit's very elliptical. Now, let me talk for a minute about some things, other things that are going on in the US. You've seen other astrologers talk on and write about, what it means for Pluto returning to its natal place in the US chart, which is happening over the next couple of years. Well, Pluto in the US chart's at 27 degrees of Capricorn. Pluto returning to its natal spot is um, a big hoop-de-doo, just like a Saturn return is is a chart that tells a story. It's a big deal. You feel a Saturn return. Every year when the sun returns, you can set up a solar return chart that tells the circumstances of your life over the next year. You can have a lunar return chart that tells the circumstances over the next month of your life. And Pluto return chart, if you were to live 248 years, you would have a Pluto return, and that would tell the circumstances of your life over the next 248 years. But you know what? I've never been able to study cyclical Pluto returns because in cultures, countries, civilizations don't seem to last that long. And we don't have the historical data to have timed charts for that. So I'm saying all of the um, material that you hear about Pluto returns is speculative, but I can give you my opinion, and it's just an opinion. I believe that this is because Pluto is so important in the US chart. It is shaking everything up to its core. Now, Pluto in the chart that I use is in the ninth house, which is the house of ideas, the higher mind. And in the chart that I use for the US, the progressed moon, which shows the day to day ideas and movement of the public, uh, is the progressed moon in the US chart is at just crossing the uh, Pluto in the chart. It's in Capricorn, just having crossed the progressed Pluto, the natal Pluto, and now we'll, in the next couple months, we'll cross the progressed Pluto. So the time that we're living in, 2021, my estimation, is the fulcrum point. We will um, live in a different world next year. We are already in this transition of consciousness. And I'm telling each of you, the thoughts that you think, the beliefs that you hold, how you behave, how you treat other people will have a very profound effect. So be on the right side of history. Um, this is an incredibly important time. Um, Again, this is the subject matter, astrology and politics, is very vast. I've only just touched on it, but if anybody has a burning question, I will talk for another 7 minutes. If anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question, propose something in chat, I will get it and we'll, answer it. Okay, if there's no questions.
Wait a second. Thank you. I thought this was really interesting. And it was funny because I'm taking this environmental biology class. And this last week, so there were two groups. The class is small because of COVID, but then the professor said, choose a spokesperson. And what we were supposed to do in our small group was everyone said like the most exciting thing or like the coolest thing they had done within the last year. And so for me, I went to Everglades National Park. Someone else was like, "Oh, I just golfed. It's been very boring." And then one of the young women said, "I got my concealed weapons permit." So I was like, "Oh, okay." I didn't say anything. But then the spokesperson, so she was supposed to pick one, like the coolest from the group, but she ended up going around the group saying this person did this person did that. And when she said, "Oh, this person got her concealed weapons permit," so she said it, and then she goes, "Oh, that was very patriotic of her." And I was like, "Wait, what? Like, how did that?" I mean, I just thought it was so bizarre, like that association between getting a gun and it being like patriotic. But she was probably like 18. I mean, she's the woman who said it was like, she's young. And I just thought it was interesting that was her
Hey,
association with
I,
patriotism,
uh,
with getting a gun.
but what I'm saying is that, obviously, uh, there are people who believe that what we have to do is to kill our enemy. It's the same, mindset, the industrial mindset that says you have a germ in your body. Let's construct something that goes into your body and kills the germ. Uh, it's like you going out to Everglades Park, you're uniting with nature, you're communing with nature. It's that recognition that we have one planet. We all live together on this one planet, and we can't be impervious. If you are polluting, you're polluting the planet for everybody. And pollution is not just throwing away, a disposable plastic bottle. It's the thoughts that you think. um, and and it is important that we get into the right mindset, is to recognize, you know, oh, you get your concealed weapon permit, I'm going to go get a gun and shoot you before you have a chance to use it. Well, it's the wrong mindset. We're not. It's like Gandhi said, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. How are we going to build a better society if we don't root it out in ourselves first? As Jesus says to the man who's asking, "How many times must I forgive my brother?" And he says, "You have to get the beam out of your own eye before you can see more clearly the speck in your brother's." And that's where we all end up. This is not to be Pollyannish about it. It's not to ignore that there's real hatred, there's real issues in the world. The question was asked, and I'm going to quickly answer it. Will the current strife in Israel Palestine escalate into a worldwide nuclear conflict? My short answer is no, but I do have something interesting on this. In my intermediate class on mundane astrology in my correspondence school, I talked about and used the example of the creation of the state of Israel, which ostensibly was the creation of the state of Palestine at the same time, which had Pluto, the all or nothing Lord of destruction, conjunct Saturn, the Lord of constriction, right at the midheaven. Well, guess what else? What other country had that? India and Pakistan had Pluto and Saturn conjunct. It's very violent, tends to be. Anything could be violent, it doesn't have to be. There can always be a higher way out. When the plane hit the World Trade Towers, Pluto and Saturn were opposing each other right on the ascendant descendant axis of the US birth chart. Um, so in that, we see these these circumstances working themselves out. Saturn is in Aquarius now. It's well beyond Pluto. Pluto and Saturn were conjunct with Jupiter in January of 2020 when the pandemic took off. Pluto rules um, viruses. Okay, Pluto will be leaving Capricorn uh, in 2024, and the permutations of the virus will be managed at that time up to a point. I got it. It's my personal opinion, and I hope I'm wrong. But the astrology seems to indicate that there are still many more deaths to come from the pandemic. And I would not wish that on anybody. Somebody asked a question: uh, will Trump and his associates finally be indicted? There'll be indictments uh, to come. But and again, as a human being, as somebody with their own beliefs, I would I would I would wish that any uh, wrongdoings come to the surface. If somebody commits a crime and they're of no harm to the public and there's no chance that they would do it again, in my heart, I would say, geez, I'd like them to not have to go to prison for it or do any time, anything like that. Um, but the problem with the people with Trump um, and his associates being so over the top uh, and so flagrantly um, um, illegitimate, pathological lying, uh, outright stealing, theft, malfeasance. Um, why does Trump want this office in government when he never wanted to actually do it once he got there? He had no ability to do it. Um, but it wasn't. It was just like you know, a, a kleptocracy for all of his associates. They ended up making tons of money uh, off of the American people. And just like Donald Trump in business, figures if he could cheat you out of something, you're a sucker. And he was smart for being able to do it. Well, I don't think that that's a good principle for government. So, yes, I would like to see um, there be some culpability. It's not that I feel in my heart punitive. It's just how do you stop the damage? You know, we are in a time of transition mentally, all of us, um, and for the whole culture, the vibration is raising, and all we have to do is to tune into it, whether it be in spiritual practice or whether it's in our behavior or everyday life. I tell people, because I'm asked by my clients all the time, uh, questions that are germane to the subject. I tell people, start your day thinking positive thoughts, reading something spiritual. End your day reading something spiritual, meditating, doing something that where you remember that all of the stuff that we tend to get lost in, all of this impermanence, all of this Maya, is transitory. If you can do that every day, you're part of the solution. You're part of the help. Uh, sure, donate time, money, and energy to good causes. Help others where you can. All of this stuff. Don't treat somebody in a way that you wouldn't want to be treated. It's like it's you know the the things that we have to do are simple, but that doesn't make them easy. They're not easy. We all have this stuff in us that we have to get out and work our way through. And the political arena is one of them. looking to political leaders as not something that's divorced from your everyday life, but something that's emanating, a principle in our collective consciousness. Anyway, I have enjoyed our time together today. Again, if you have questions going forward once a month, I will do questions and answers. Um, if we get off on any of these topics in going into the future, I'll share, do the screen share and show you the charts. It would have taken too much time today to cover any of this landscape. So I thank you all for spending a little bit of your Sunday with me. I wish you all the best. And remember, um, it's up to you. It isn't up to your political leader. It isn't up to your neighbors, your spouse, your friends. It's up to you to make a better world. And it can start right now. It's in progress, and we are all a work in progress, just as the better world is a work in progress. So, God bless you. Namaste. Take care. I will see you soon. I hope.